All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for episode 6 of our 4-Hour River Educational Webinar Series. My name is Emily Floor, and I'm the Executive Director for St. Mary's Riverkeeper. And today's webinar is an opportunity for everyone to learn about the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge from Refuge Manager Michael Lusk, what it takes to be a World Heritage Site, and why it is critical that the Okefenokee be globally recognized as having outstanding universal value. Our St. Mary's River begins in the Okefenokee Swamp and flows 130 miles to the Atlantic Ocean at Cumberland Island National Seashore. Protecting our headwaters is important for preserving the health of our river, and a World Heritage Site designation would bring international attention to the region, our community, and our beloved river. If this status is awarded to our corner of the world, our St. Mary's River would be bookended by a World Heritage Site and a national seashore. And this is super exciting and will help St. Mary's Riverkeeper fulfill its mission to protect our beautiful river. But before we hear from Michael Lusk and your questions, I want to talk a little bit about St. Mary's Riverkeeper and the work that we do to protect our St. Mary's River. Founded in 2016, St. Mary's Riverkeeper is an independent voice for the St. Mary's River, dedicated to improving water quality, ensuring the river thrives for future generations, promoting low-impact development, finding solutions for water-related issues in the watershed, and advocating against industrial threats. As a trusted voice for the St. Mary's River, Riverkeeper fulfills its mission through educational and outreach programs, water quality monitoring, and advocacy efforts. We also provide opportunities for people to experience and serve their river through boat rides, field trips, and river cleanups. Our top priorities at the moment are monitoring the health of our waterways through frequent water quality testing and raising awareness about the potential impacts of the proposed mine may have on our St. Mary's River. As a border river, the St. Mary's River is comprised of 4 counties, 2 in Georgia and 2 in Florida, with roughly 160,000 residents who depend on the health of the river for tourism, recreation, and commercial fishing. The watershed is 1,600 square miles and is comprised of 40% wetlands and is home to many endangered and threatened species. The unique shape of the St. Mary's River is defined by the natural break and trail ridge, a 100-mile-long ancient barrier island that is believed to have formed the swamp 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, when the oceans receded. The water in the southeastern corner of the swamp pooled and found its way to the Atlantic Ocean, forming the St. Mary's River. Each section of the river provides rivergoers a different experience and ecosystem, all while maintaining the beautiful tannin-stained water. Closest to the swamp, you'll see the beautiful and iconic white sandy beaches, remnant of when this area was once the beachfront. And as you turn eastward to head out into the ocean, the tree line is the shoreline, and you can travel for miles without seeing a single home. As the water becomes saltier, the marsh grasses begin to appear, and the image of a coastal ecosystem becomes a reality. This river provides an escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life with how remote and undeveloped it is. There are several ways that you can become engaged with the St. Mary's River and Riverkeeper. We do have our water quality testing campaign going on right now, where we are pinpointing some potential hotspots for E. coli contamination. If you want to see the river, we have some boat tours scheduled. We have some several next Saturday, September 30th, and then again on December 2nd. And then our biggest fundraiser of the year is our Low Country Boil, happening October 21st. And tickets are on sale now. You can visit our website to see to get tickets for any and all of these. If you'd like to get involved, we are a volunteer-based organization, so we do need some river ambassadors, people that will stand at a table and talk about the St. Mary's River and Riverkeeper. You can help fund our efforts by becoming a member or making a donation or sponsoring a program or event, or volunteering your time, treasure, and talent. But now for Michael Lusk, who you are all here to listen to. So I'll just give a brief bio of who he is and then turn it over to him. Michael Lusk is a 28-year veteran of the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. Born in Florida, he grew up in eastern North Carolina and received a bachelor's and master's in fish and wildlife biology with a minor in forestry from North Carolina State University. He is a certified wildlife biologist by the Wildlife Society and a founding member of the Invasive Species Working Group. After graduation, he served as a wildlife biologist working for the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He then moved overseas for 2 years as a wildlife biologist for the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, working with highly endangered endemic birds. He still serves as a member of the Mariana Crow Recovery Team. Michael then joined the Fish and Wildlife Service as the Endangered Species Recovery Biologist in Honolulu, Hawaii. During this time, he conducted field work to establish the population status of the endangered, I have to say this, Tinian monarch, which is actually a bird, and authored the package that led to the delisting of this bird from the endangered species list. He left there to join the National Wildlife Refuge system and took a job as assistant manager at Bond Swamp National Wildlife Refuge in central Georgia. Following that, he traveled to the southern border of Arizona as deputy project manager at the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, where he dealt with illegal human migration through conservation lands. Having learned about the damage that invasive species can do to native ecosystems from his time in the Pacific Islands, Michael moved to Fish and Wildlife Service headquarters in Washington, D.C. as the invasive species coordinator. In this position, Michael created the first ever national invasive plant management course for the Fish and Wildlife Service and the $1 million competitive grant to address large invasive species projects. Michael returned to the field to take refuge manager position at Crystal River National Wildlife Refuge Complex in Central Florida, where he worked with the endangered Florida manatee and helped extend protections for manatees in Kings Bay, the largest natural gathering area for manatees in the world. Michael then moved to southern Georgia in 2013 to become the refuge manager of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, the largest national wildlife refuge in the eastern United States. Michael served as the agency administrator for the West Mims wildfire in 2017 that burned 152,000 acres of public and private lands and cost $50 million to suppress. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael while I read this last part. I'm going to stop sharing. Please use the Q&A to ask questions during Michael's presentation. I'll answer the ones that I can and then leave the rest for Michael at the end. All right, take it away, Michael.
Okay, great. Well, greetings, everyone. Thank you for being on the webinar today. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And let's hope this works. Okay. All right. There's my screen. Okay. I might have to hold on. I don't see how this let me share a different screen because I don't see how that one allows me to move forward. Let me try this one. Oh, okay. So I apologize. I'm not sure what's going on here. Okay, wait a minute. Let me see. Hold on just a minute, folks. There we go. Now I got it. I'm sorry, I've never shared on Zoom before. Okay, here we go. So the
Michael,
yes?
Can you do the display settings? Because we see both your current screen and the next screen. Like we saw before.
Okay, yeah, because mine shows only one.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Let me see if I can. Oh, I see. Okay, let me see.
You see the display settings at the top.
Display settings. No, I got you. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, now what do you see? Do you see both again?
Still see both, yes.
Okay, let's try that again. Okay. All right, we'll try it again. Now, do you still see both?
I don't see anything anymore. We just see you.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I have no idea why this is doing this. Okay, because I can't get back on mine. Okay. What about now? What do you see? Do you see just me?
Yes, just you.
Okay. Okay, let me just end it and let me start over. And so I don't know what's going on. I can't even get to my screen with my let me try this. Okay. Okay, let's see. All right, now let me try again here. Okay, now let's try. And it's getting me a graphics control panel. Okay, let's try this. All right, what do you see now by chance?
What looks like a PowerPoint.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Yep. That's perfect.
Okay. All right. Sorry about all that, everyone. I apologize. Now let's see if we can get moving on this. All right. So the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. There we are. And hopefully now you see the map with the alligator on it, right? Okay, just checking. All right. So here we are. I don't know how familiar those who are on the webinar are. So if I give you some background information that you don't really need, I apologize for that. But here's the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge down in the corner of southeast Georgia. And this is a map of the refuge. And I always like to spend just a few minutes here to explain a few things because I found that people may have heard of the Okefenokee, but they often don't know much about it. So this is a map of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge that you're looking at right now. The Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge right now is at 407,000 acres. It's at about half the size of the state of Rhode Island, and it protects 93% of what is the Okefenokee Swamp. So the majority of the Okefenokee Swamp right now is in federally owned land. And if you'll look down on the east side of the map, right in the middle, it says main entrance. That's where I am. That's just south of Folkestone, Georgia. That's the main entrance into the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. Up on the north, you'll see something that says Okefenokee Swamp Park. Okefenokee Swamp Park is not part of the National Wildlife Refuge. The Okefenokee Swamp Park is about 1,300 acres that's actually belongs to the state of Georgia, but Okefenokee Swamp Park is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. All right, so it's very confusing that people often think the Okefenokee Swamp Park is the National Wildlife Refuge, but it's not. It's something completely different. And then on the west side, if you'll see sort of in the middle of the map there, it says Stephen C. Foster State Park. So that's very confusing to folks as well. There's a state park inside the National Wildlife Refuge. The state park actually doesn't own any land. They lease land from us, the federal government, but they are actually completely inside the National Wildlife Refuge. So when you're at Stephen C. Foster State Park, you're actually inside the National Wildlife Refuge. So like I said, it's very confusing for folks that there are these places called Okefenokee Swamp Park and Stephen C. Foster State Park, but we are a National Wildlife Refuge, not a park. Most national parks were set aside for scenic beauty, whereas National Wildlife Refuges are set aside for wildlife values. Even though we're all under the Department of Interior, we're still different entities. So I just point out to everyone, we are not a park. We are a National Wildlife Refuge. Now, while you're looking at this map, I want you to look at a couple of things because I'm going to reference them later in the slide presentation, but I'm not going to show this map again. One, if you'll look at all the colored lines in the middle of the map, those are all water trails. I'll talk about those a little later, but basically there are 120 miles worth of water trails in the National Wildlife Refuge. About half of them you can access with a motorboat of 10 horsepower or less, but all of them you can access by kayak or canoe. And you'll also see some little brown squares, and if you look very carefully, you see it's like a little picture of a shelter. And that's right, as I'm going to reference later, those are shelters in the swamp where people can camp, so they can get a real experience of what it's like to be in the swamp. All right, so I'm going to go on now, and hopefully this will work. There we go. I just mentioned the three main entrances. The National Wildlife Refuge was established in 1937 by executive order by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The Okie Swamp Park was established in 1945, and Stephen C. Foster State Park in 1954. Okay, so here's the oldest map that we have that shows the Okefenokee Swamp, and you'll see that it's not called Okefenokee. This is from Bartram's map, William Bartram, and in the journey he made through the southeastern United States back in the 1700s. And back then, it was called the Onegwa-Finnegaw. And that's from a Creek Muskogee word that means roughly land of the shaking water. And of course, that has come down after a couple of hundred years. Today, the Okefenokee, the land of the trembling earth. A little bit of history about the Okefenokee. First, it was ceded by the Creek Muskogee Nation to the federal government in 1817 at the Treaty of Fort Jackson. And so the federal government had this big chunk of land. And so it's the Industrial Revolution. So what do you do with swampland? Well, you drain it and turn it into farmland. And so that was the plan. In 1891, there was a corporation formed called the Suwannee Canal Corporation. And their plan was to dig a canal into the heart of the swamp and drain it into the St. Mary's. Because the Okefenokee Swamp sits about 80 feet higher in elevation than the St. Mary's. So you can see that red line. That was the Suwannee Canal that was dug about 11 miles into the heart of the swamp. And then they were going to connect it, where you see the red arrow, down to the St. Mary's River, and all the water was going to drain into the St. Mary's River. Well, fortunately for us, they ran out of money before they could complete the canal. So they went bankrupt in 1894. Then after that, the Okefenokee Swamp, or the majority of it, was sold to the Hebbard Cypress Company. And they came in and they cut out the big old growth cypress and the old growth pine trees in the interior of the swamp, and also on the exterior of the swamp as well. And on your right-hand side of your screen, you see a map showing the actual, what they did is they established a town on Billy's Island, which is right in the middle of the map if you look at it closely. There was actually a logging town there that had about 600 people on it. And they had a movie theater, they had churches, they had schools. They had an entire community on Billy's Island. And what they did is they built, as you can see from the map, they built railroad trestles out into the swamp. They cut the timber, brought it out, and then took it to log mills. And they did that until 1927. And if you go out there today, it looks like no one's ever lived there. There's an old graveyard there and a couple of rusted out hulks of some trucks. But other than that, there's nothing on that island that would make you think that it had, over 600 people on it at one time. Well, after that, after a lot of the timber was removed, sorry about that, that's when it became a National Wildlife Refuge in 1937. One of the differences between National Wildlife Refuges and national parks is that National Wildlife Refuges allow hunting and fishing. National parks do not allow either one. So in the Okefenokee, fishing is allowed throughout the entire National Wildlife Refuge, but hunting is restricted to just a few areas on the edges of the National Wildlife Refuge. It's not allowed throughout the entire refuge. Okay. As Emily mentioned, the Okefenokee is important because it is the headwaters of two major rivers, the Suwannee River, which flows out of the west side, and the St. Mary's River that flows out of the east side. This is possible because the Okefenokee is primarily rain-fed. About 80% of all the water in the Okefenokee comes from rainwater. Only about 20% comes in from tributaries up on the northwest corner. So that means a couple of things. That means the water in the Okefenokee is extremely pure. The water is very clean, and so it provides clean water for the Suwannee and the St. Mary's River. It also makes the Okefenokee unique as a wetland because it's a precipitation-fed swamp. So think about most other swamps that you're familiar with, like in Louisiana or North Carolina, places like that. Those swamps are at the end of rivers, or they're floodplains that are flooded by rivers. The Okefenokee is completely different. It's fed by rainwater and then becomes rivers. So instead of being at the end of a river, it's at the beginning of a river. And so that's actually very unique, and one of the things that makes the swamp different. It's also important, as we're going to talk about later, that it's what has allowed peat to form in the Okefenokee. And so there are places in the Okefenokee where the peat layers can be as much as 15 feet thick. And that, of course, is a huge storage of carbon. In fact, the scientists tell us that there's more carbon stored in the peat of the Okefenokee than in all the vegetation that currently grows in it. So it's a pretty amazing and important place as a storage for carbon. Okay. There's over 600 species of plants found in the Okefenokee. On the left-hand side of your screen there, that's one of the hooded pitcher plants that we have. But what makes it unique is we have a subspecies of hooded pitcher plant that's only found in the Okefenokee, and it's called the giant Okefenokee pitcher plant because most pitcher plants only grow to about 18 inches tall. This pitcher plant grows to over 3 feet tall. So it's twice as large as most pitcher plants that grow other places. Lots of wildlife, 234 species of birds, 64 species of reptiles, 50 species of mammals. One thing you might be surprised to learn is that we have a very large black bear population. We have as many black bears in our area around the swamp, in and around the swamp, as they have in North Georgia in the mountains. And our black bears are just as big, if not bigger, as well. So sometimes people find that surprising. And of course, the iconic alligator that everyone thinks about. This is one of the endangered species at the Okefenokee. This is the only species for which we do a lot of active management. This is the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. Now, people often wonder, well, what's the big deal about this bird? As you can see, it's just black and white. It's relatively small. And so it's not very showy. But the reason it's important is because, or what makes it unique, is it needs old, mature pine trees with low understory to be able to reproduce. It actually, as far as I know, it's the only bird in the entire world that actually makes a cavity into a living tree. All other birds use dead trees or dead parts of trees. So this bird will actually peck through the sapwood down into the heartwood of these old growth pine trees and create a cavity. But because it has sap on it, of course, it takes a long time for them to make these cavities. They have to peck a little, wait for it to dry, the sap to dry, then peck some more, wait for the sap to dry. So it can take months or even up to 2 or 3 years to make a single cavity. And so that's why they're endangered, because they have to have these cavities, and to make the cavities, they have to have old growth pine trees, and there's not a lot of those left anymore. All right, let's keep going. For those of you that older in the crowd, you may have heard of this comic strip called Pogo. It ran from the 1950s to the 1970s, and it was one of the earliest environmental cartoons in newspapers. And it all occurred in the Okefenokee swamp. Now, I'll tell you a little bit of interesting history. Kermit the Frog was born in the Okefenokee swamp. This is a cartoon I found online about Kermit the Frog and Miss Piggy going to visit Kermit's relatives in the Okefenokee swamp. But if you look at the tree in the left-hand corner of the cartoon, there's a little silhouette. That is Pogo Possum leaning underneath the tree. So that's an homage to Pogo. And okay, but I want to point out that not only refuges are set aside for wildlife, but refuges are for people too. And we are very much open to the public and encourage public visitation. As I mentioned, we have 120 miles worth of water trails. Remember those colored lines we saw? And so you can kayak and canoe to those overnight shelters, and I'll mention that again in just a minute, but we get about 4,000 people camping in the swamp every year. And you'll notice there's a wilderness sign. All of the interior, the wetland of the refuge is National Wilderness. That's another federal designation. And that is meant to protect the wilderness aspect of it. So one of the things that's very important is that when we have people camping out in the swamp, they have a true wilderness experience. And like I said, you can camp in the swamp. Here's a picture of one of our camping platforms. And you can make a reservation for those on rec.gov. And then you call us and we help you make the reservation. But you can spend the night in the swamp. And what's great about that is you get a permit. So it's just you and your family or your friends, and there's not a bunch of random people showing up. And you can have a true wilderness experience with just you and your family or friends. This is Floyd's. This is a cabin, an old hunting cabin on Floyd's Island. The cabin was built in the 1920s by the Hebbard Cypress Company, and that cabin is still there. And you can camp on Floyd's Island, and you can sleep inside this historic cabin if you would like to. Someone did a study of the most remote spots of in every nation. In each state. And this is the most remote spot in the state of Georgia. So you can come and spend overnight in a historic hunting cabin and be in the most remote spot in the state of Georgia, here in the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. Next, this is our boardwalk. So maybe you're not into paddling and things like that. Well, we have some trails that still will allow you to see the swamp. This is our boardwalk. It's 3/4 of a mile each way, so a 1.5 mile round trip. And at the end of the boardwalk, you see down in the lower right-hand corner, that's our observation tower. So even if you don't want to go paddling or kayaking or boating, you can still get a chance to see the swamp by walking along our boardwalk. One of the things we're most proud of is we have an annual Pioneer Day. This is Cheshire Island Homestead. This is a historic cabin that was built back in the 1920s. And so once a year, we have this annual Pioneer Day. It's on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. And we have the family come in. This is the descendants you see on the right-hand side of the Cheshires who built the cabin. And we have an old-time syrup boil where they boil down cane syrup, and they create some syrup that you can actually sample and buy there at the homestead. So that's once a year on the Saturday before Thanksgiving. Okay, the swamp, the National Wildlife Refuge, is important to our local communities. It's been, we had some economists come in and do a study, and they found that the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge contributes $50 million annually to local gateway communities like Fargo and Waycross and Folkestone, and it indirectly supports about 826 jobs. So yeah, it's important not only the National Wildlife Refuge is important not only to wildlife and to people who like to hike and camp and things like that. It's also important to the local economies because it brings in tourism. Fire is important now to the National Wildlife Refuge. Oops, sorry about that. We do a lot of controlled burning. Here we see some of our fire staff setting a fire on purpose in the woods. And the idea then is what we're trying to do is burn down some of the fuel so that if we do have a wildfire, it's not catastrophic. And this is also important because the swamp and the uplands where we have the pine trees, they are communities that are made to burn, right? They're supposed to burn. And so we try to burn them every 2 to 3 years. That keeps the environment healthy. It's good for the wildlife, and it cuts down on the chances of wildfire. So the swamp is not necessarily what you think it looks like, okay? So I have some pictures of different habitats on the swamp. About 9% of the refuge are these. These are upland pine habitats. We're working to restore longleaf pine forests on these habitats. That's what it would have been there historically. Longleaf pine, interestingly enough, used to be the major forest type in the southeastern United States. There was once about 90 million acres, but now there's only 2 to 3% of that left. And so we try to restore longleaf pine on our upland areas. Only 17% of the refuge looks like this. This is what you normally think of that a swamp looks like with these big cypress trees. We do have some of that, but that's mainly over on the west side near Big Water and Minnie's Lake. But so it's not, most of the refuge does not look like this, which is kind of hard for people to wrap their minds around. About 14% of the refuge looks like this. This is what we call the open prairies. And they're called that because the water is shallow enough, maybe only 1 to 3 feet deep, where you get emergent plants come up. And so it looks like a big wet prairie is really what it looks like. But most of the refuge looks like this very thick, very tangled underbrush. And that's important as we're going to talk about fire in just a minute. But most of the refuge is just very thick growth. This is an example. Okay, so what you see here is some of our water trails that people go kayaking on or canoeing. But if you'll notice, if you look carefully, especially at the top of the slide, you'll see how dry it is because we do have droughts in the swamp. I tell people to think of the swamp as a giant sponge, right? Because that's what it is with all that peat. It just soaks up all the water. So a wet sponge is a happy sponge, but we do have droughts and those are natural too. And so it's when just like a sponge can get dry, the National Wildlife Refuge, this Okefenokee swamp can also get dry when we have a drought. And what happens when you have a drought? Well, and things get really dry, well, it can burn. And that's natural. People don't think of a swamp as something that can catch on fire and burn, but that is indeed, that happens, and that's natural. So we want the swamp to burn occasionally. That's not bad for it. That's actually healthy for it. But the problem is that the swamp is surrounded, the National Wildlife Refuge is surrounded by private timberland. And if you can see up in the upper right-hand corner of the slideshow there, on the left-hand side, that's all swamp. And then there's a fire break there between the swamp and that private timberland. Now you can see how all that private timber is very small and very densely packed. So if the swamp were to catch on fire and then it burns across and it gets into that private timberland, then it burns up all the private timber. So we work very, very hard with our local, with the state and our local private landowners to try to keep fire in the swamp and make sure it doesn't get out. But sometimes it does. This is a fire map of the 2017 West Mims fire, and I was here for that. All those different colors, that's where it would burn in a single day. And if you look down on the lower right-hand corner of the map, you see all that color is outside the boundary of the National Wildlife Refuge. That burned up about $38 million worth of private timber. And so that's catastrophic. The timber companies don't have insurance on that timber because it's too expensive. So when it burns up, they just lose it. So that whole fire burned up about 152,000 acres. Most of that was on the refuge, which was fine. But that 32,000 acres that burned up on private lands wound up in an economic loss of $38 million. So that's what we really try to avoid. We want it to burn inside the swamp, but stop the fire when it comes to the edges. And that's what the fire looked like on Highway 2 there in Florida, as you're between Florida and Georgia, as it was leaving the refuge and jumping over onto private land. It was a very extremely catastrophic event. So now I'm going to end up my talk by just talking a little bit about the bid to make the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge a World Heritage Site. Oh, and I am so sorry. I had corrected these slides. I don't know why they're so dark. I apologize for that. But basically, what the World Heritage Program is, it's run by the United Nations. And it's a program that recognizes the most unique natural and cultural areas in the world. So you might have the Great Barrier Reef, you might have Stonehenge, you might have the Great Wall of China, just some examples. And it's an international treaty that the United States is a signatory to. And like I said, it doesn't change if you become a World Heritage Site. It doesn't give the United Nations power over those sites. It doesn't allow them to make management decisions. It doesn't give them ownership. It doesn't change the sovereignty of the nation at all. All it does, it's just like saying this is recognized by an international body as being a very important and unique area. So here's a little overview. The treaty was signed in 1972 by the United States. In 1978, Yellowstone National Park is inscribed as the first natural World Heritage Site in the United States. And these sites are selected on their outstanding universal value to humanity. In other words, it selects only the best of the best, if you will. Before you're inscribed as a World Heritage Site, you have to prove to an international body of this committee selected by the United Nations that you really are unique in the entire world. And the nations that have these World Heritage Sites, basically, they're saying we pledge to protect these sites, but the nations retain their sovereignty and full control. The United Nations does not get any sovereignty or any control. It's basically the nations that have World Heritage Sites saying we also agree and we're going to protect these sites. Oh boy, and I apologize for this one too. This is a tentative list of the next places that are going to be considered for World Heritage Sites. And these are natural sites in the United States. So you see places like Big Bend National Park is one. And there in the middle, you see the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. So we've been on this tentative list, actually all the way back to 2007, but the most recent tentative list was made in 2017, and we were on that list. Okay, some of the benefits of being a World Heritage Site. Let me go back one. Basically increases our global visibility. I tell people that becoming a World Heritage Site is like getting a 5-star review on Yelp or Travelocity, right? It's like saying this body, this international body, the United Nations, recognizes this as a very important place globally. So it will raise our visibility globally. And that will bring in additional growth in tourism and other economic benefits. There are people who just go from World Heritage Site to World Heritage Site. And so with this designation, it will let the whole world know that we are an important site, and we should definitely see an increase in tourism as a result. Hopefully, it will also enhance the community spirit as people in the local communities around us, Fargo, Folkestone, Waycross, as they understand how really special the Okefenokee Swamp is. It will give them an increased feeling of pride in their local community. And it'll also increase the awareness of folks as to why we need to protect the Okefenokee Swamp and the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. If you're interested in more information, there's a website, okefenokeeworldheritage.org, so that you can go to and get more information. They're currently raising funding, and this funding is used to help support the work. We have to create this massive document that's our nomination package, and to do that, we're hiring a consultant to help us write it, and we have to hire a number of global experts in wetlands, peatlands, and things like that to help write sections of the document so that we can make the case that the Okefenokee is truly unique and important internationally. And I want to end with this. Some people they often say to me, "Oh man, you work in a national wildlife refuge. You must have the best job in the world." Well, someone sent me this, and I think it's very funny because there's a lot of truth to it. You see, what my friends think I do as a wildlife biologist, what my mother thinks I do, what society thinks I do, what Hollywood thinks I do, what I think I do. But what I actually do is I spend a lot of time in meetings talking about budgets and things like that. So being a wildlife biologist sometimes isn't as exciting as we think it might be. But with that, I am going to conclude and turn it back over to Emily and any questions you might have.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael. I don't see any in the Q&A at the moment. One thing I do want, so if y'all do have questions, please put them in the Q&A. I'm just going to pull up a screen real fast. So this is something that is happening in September. So so everyone knows, September is National Wilderness Month. So Michael was talking about, there being a wilderness designation within the swamp. So we are, September is set aside to celebrate that. And then this coming Saturday, September 23rd, is National Public Lands Day. So this is a great way to give back to your community or experience the public lands that are around you, such as the Okefenokee. And Michael, do you want to share some of those ways that people can participate in that event on Saturday within the Okefenokee?
Well, yeah, I guess if you're interested, you could email me, but we're actually putting together, we're going to help clean up our Cheshire Island homestead for our Pioneer Day. But we have someone organizing all that. So if you're interested, you could email me and I could put you in touch with the person.
Great. We also encourage y'all to visit your public lands as well. So we do have a few questions. So I'm going to read the question out to you, Michael, just so we have it on the recording. What is your confidence level that this wonderful special place will attain World Heritage?
So I'm very confident. Now, I mean, there's no guarantees for sure, because what happens is once it's the World Heritage Site nomination package is given into this committee, they review it thoroughly. They actually have people come out and visit the site. They talk to the local communities and make sure they're, is supportive of it. And then it's voted on by this committee. And of course, sometimes, I mean, let's just be honest, sometimes international politics gets involved. And so although there's no guarantee that it will be inscribed as a World Heritage Site, I can absolutely guarantee you that we would not be putting all this time, energy, and money into it if we did not think we had a very good chance of becoming a World Heritage Site.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. Would there be an opportunity for a high school advanced AP environmental science class to visit the refuge on a field trip and dive a little bit more into the swamp, not literally, because that's dangerous, and its ecological significance, maybe get a little hands-on with things?
Sure, absolutely. And again, if you're interested in bringing a group, we have school groups come out all the time. And so if you're interested in that, again, just go ahead and email me. And I don't know if my email's in the chat, Emily, but if it's not, if you could drop it in there,
I will.
Someone can just email me and we can put you in touch with the right people.
Great. Next question is, what was the purple looking plants on the right in one of the first slides? You had the 3-foot tall pitcher plants and there was a purple one.
that I believe that was ironweed.
All right.
With the purple flowers, ironweed.
Yeah. There is one question. This is probably more for me to answer. Do we need to be worried about the mining? Or is there a concern of the mining as it relates to a World Heritage Site bid?
So I think I can address a couple of those. Okay. So just so everyone knows, with the mining, where that is right now, that's with Georgia EPD. Georgia EPD is reviewing their application to determine if they're going to issue a surface mining permit. And then there are a couple of other permits they need for water withdrawal and things like that. That is all. The comment period has been closed. And so we're just waiting. And Emily, just jump in here too. Basically we're all just waiting on Georgia EPD to make a decision. As far as how it might affect the World Heritage Site, I don't know. It depends, if it was restricted to what they're asking for, a relatively small footprint of about 600 acres, just between 2 and 3 miles away from the edge of the refuge, that might not impact our World Heritage Site designation. If it explodes and becomes a much larger mine and goes into thousands or tens of thousands of acres, then yes, that could be a problem. But we'll just have to cross those bridges when we come to it. And so go ahead, Emily, if you had any other
Yeah.
thoughts.
And Michael, one of the things, and maybe this is a question I've always had, but the refuge is 93% of the whole swamp, right? So that mine, and maybe you can clarify, or maybe I just need to find out the answer. The mine is 2 to 3 miles from the refuge's border, not the swamp's border, correct?
Yes, that's right. But in that particular area, it's I'm trying to remember the measurement. The swamp does come outside the refuge a little bit in that area, not much, but a little bit. And so I think I believe, Emily, it's still at least a couple of miles from the edge of the swamp in that
Okay.
area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so for Riverkeeper's concern of the mine is the position of the mine in relation to the swamp. It is on the southeastern corner that feeds the St. Mary's, but of course it's on that hydrologic ridge. So to the west is the swamp, and to the east is the St. Mary's. Now, when Michael was mentioning the water levels in the swamp, when it floods in that southeastern corner of the swamp, the St. Mary's River floods. It's 20% of the swamp that feeds the St. Mary's, and if that floods in the St. Mary's, water levels will increase. And you can follow those water levels. There's a couple of water level gauges on our website and through the USGS website. And then when it's dry, the St. Mary's River will also get really low and low flow. So the impact of the swamp drastically impacts the St. Mary's River as well. So our concern with water withdrawals in that corner is of top concern for us as it relates to the St. Mary's River. So we have another question. Is there anything the public can do to help with getting the World Heritage Site approved? Is there a need to raise awareness, gain support, write letters, hands-on, action? What can we do?
Yeah. So very good question, and I appreciate that. Not right now. There recently was the National Park Service, and this is confusing. The National Park Service is in charge of all the nominations for the United States. And so just last month, the National Park Service was looking for input on what areas should be nominated. And so there was a letter writing campaign at that time. And I think they got like 20,000 letters in support of the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge becoming a World Heritage Site. But we don't need that now. That's closed. So so that's okay. So at this point, I think there's no letters that need to be written or anything at this point. Right now, the next big hurdle is us writing the nomination package. So I think so for right now, there's not really a lot that needs to be done as far as public support. That will come later once the package is submitted and the World Heritage Site Committee gets ready to visit the area. We'll want to make sure we have all the public on board. But for right now, I think we're okay.
So if you guys want to talk to your friends about it, at least help spread the word. So when these things do come up, we're all kind of educated on what to happen. But of course,
Sure.
one of the really big driving forces, as Michael mentioned, is getting that packet ready, and that costs money. And so, going to the worldheritage.org website and donating. They do have a gala that's coming up. If you'd like to attend that in November, to help raise funds for that event, or for this nomination process. And St. Mary's Riverkeeper is fully invested in this process as well. We're going to all of the meetings that we are invited to as a partner in the community, as well as a financial supporter of it, because we support our headwaters as it does pertain to the health of our St. Mary's River. Because if the swamp's healthy, then the river's healthy, and that is important to us. Oh, this is a really good question, Michael. What is the time frame for a World Heritage Site?
Wow.
How long does it take?
Yeah. So that's a very good question. So let me put it this way. It's been going on a long time. We've been on that tentative list originally since 2007, and we're just now getting around to actually putting the nomination package together. The nomination package, as it's set right now, the final nomination package is set to go to the United Nations, be submitted to the United Nations in February of 2025. So after that, then it goes to the committee. They review it. They actually send a committee to the local area to visit with the surrounding communities and look at the site. And so that'll probably take another year. So I would say we're at least 2 years, maybe 3 years out from being designated as a World Heritage Site. And that's normal, by the way.
Okay.
That process is started. That's not unusual at all.
So what are some of the steps that y'all have taken? Obviously, it's been on the tentative list since
Right.
2007, so it hasn't really caught a lot of efforts until recently. So I guess what's kind of the steps y'all have taken so far?
Yeah, so we've been working on the actual nomination document now for a couple of years. A former biologist of ours, Sarah Eicher, really wrote most of it. And then we had some experts review it. And so the nomination package has already been it's been probably been at least 3 years now. We've been working on just the package, and it still has another year of work to go. So it's close to being finished, but not finished entirely. One things we've been doing is been having public meetings with communities in the area. We've had one in Folkestone. This Friday, we're actually having another public meeting in Waycross, Georgia, with Congressman Buddy Carter, who is behind it and is fully supportive of the project as well. And so we'll probably also have one of those public meetings over in Homerville at some point as well. And the idea is those are the 3 gateway communities that surround the National Wildlife Refuge. And so we're having these public meetings to make sure that we have public support in those gateway communities. And so then the next step, like I said, is really making sure that the nomination package is in good shape. We have someone that's assigned to that's sort of taking ownership of that. And then they're going to be asking world experts in wetlands and peatlands and things like that to review it further. So those are the steps. And really, right now, we have a deadline of February 2025. And so we're pushing hard to get the nomination package ready by then.
Which seems so far away, but it'll come up
it's
fast.
not at all. Yeah.
So 2023 is already almost gone.
That's right.
Is there a model that y'all are using for like multiple gateway communities, the approach of getting multiple counties involved in such a large scale investment?
Well, but yeah, so that's a good question. But I would say almost all World Heritage sites involve multiple communities and are at a large scale. So again, there's nothing that unusual about what we're doing with the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. We do have, I have a couple of other nomination packages. One was for a marine reserve out in the Pacific. The other one, I believe, is for some Native American mounds in Ohio. So yes, we do have some examples that we're looking at. But the other thing that we've been told by the National Park Service, who oversees this World Heritage thing, is that every application is different. Everyone's unique. None are exactly the same. So we do have some models, but we realize that they're only so much, they're only so useful because everything's different.
In your opinion, how would a World Heritage Site designation benefit not just the community, but the environment that surrounds it, the ecosystem, the St. Mary's, the Swanee? How would it really benefit us?
Yeah, so great question. So as far as obviously it would benefit the local communities by increasing tourism for sure and revenue that way. But as far as a lot of the environmental benefits, is that if nothing else, the most important thing I think it does is raise awareness about the Okefenokee to an international level. Not only it would nationally as well, but also internationally. Because think about it. Now, when you think about the Grand Canyon, you think about Yellowstone, you think about Everglades. In the same breath now, people are going to be thinking about the Okefenokee Swamp. Because what it does is it says we're just as important as a natural area as those places are. All the things that makes them unique and important, well, we're just as unique as important. And in fact, in my opinion, we're even more so, because basically the Okefenokee, what makes it really unique is it is a wetland on a gigantic scale that is basically a fully functioning ecosystem that is almost exactly, well, maybe not almost exactly, but very close to what as it would have appeared when European settlers first arrived on the continent. The hydrology is still intact. The species are still intact. Now, granted, I know a lot of the old growth trees have been cut off, but they're regrowing. That's a renewable resource. Nothing has been changed to the point where it's dramatically different versus, say, like the Everglades, right? Which has been ditched, drained, and diked and changed forever. That's not the same ecosystem. And there still became a World Heritage Site. Well, the Okefenokee is intact, and that's what makes it unique. For the most part, it's intact. And so what it would do then is raise awareness that, wow, wait, we really do have a unique resource here that's different than any place else in the world. And yeah, we need to protect it. So like I said, it doesn't give the United Nations any power to protect it. It doesn't give them any management. It doesn't mean anything changes, as far as getting permits. We don't have to check with the United Nations, nothing like that. It just means that it's more visible on the national scale and international scale.
Well, thank you. Well, we only have about 2 minutes left. I do not see any more questions.
Okay.
Michael, do you have any more last minute
No,
words of wisdom?
I appreciate everyone tuning in, and I hope it was worthwhile and that you learned a little about the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, and we look forward to having you come visit sometime.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This will be recorded and put on our website for future viewing. And thank you, Michael, for all that you do. And happy 10 years, I guess, in this position.
That's right. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your day.
Bye.
Bye.